Your hairstyle could get you fined or excommunicated in the Middle Ages. Medieval grooming was a high-stakes language, where every braid and every whisker broadcast your social rank, your faith, and your power. Forget the dirty, matted hair you see in films. This was a world of intricate fashion, where nobles wore towering headdresses and knights shaped their beards like weapons. By the end of this journey, you will be able to look at any medieval painting and read a person's life story just from their hair. We will uncover why some monks shaved their heads in a sacred ring and how a conqueror's haircut reshaped a nation. What do you think your own hair would have said about you in that world? A single misplaced lock of hair could cost you your entire yearly earnings. This was the stark reality of the medieval world, where your hairstyle was less about vanity and more about a public declaration of your identity. It was a non-verbal language everyone understood, instantly conveying your age, your marital status, and your precise rung on the social ladder. For a young, unmarried noblewoman, long, unbound hair flowing freely down her back was a clear signal of her availability. It was a banner of youth and potential. The moment she married, that banner was furled. She would cover her hair completely with veils, wimples, and elaborate headdresses, a public vow of modesty and fidelity to her husband. This visual code was enforced with the full weight of the law. Sumptuary laws were intricate sets of regulations designed to control extravagance and, more importantly, to make the social hierarchy visible and immutable. These laws dictated everything from the fabrics you could wear to the specific furs you could trim your garments with, and they absolutely governed hair. A merchant's wife, no matter how wealthy, could be fined for imitating the complex, towering braids of a duchess. This created a world where you could literally see a person's station in life from 100 paces. The peasant's short, practical crop, easy to manage in the fields, was a world apart from the aristocrat's elaborate, time-consuming curls. Your hair did not just express who you were. It told the world who you were allowed to be. That same visual language extended far beyond the hair on your head, speaking just as loudly from the faces of men. A man's beard was not merely facial hair. It was a public resume, carved directly onto his skin. A full, carefully groomed beard could broadcast the wisdom of an elder, the proven courage of a seasoned warrior, or the profound piety of a hermit who had renounced the comforts of the world. Kings and emperors understood this power intimately. A clean-shaven young ruler might seem like a boy playing at a man's game, but by cultivating a thick beard, he could visually transform himself. He projected an image of maturity, experience, and unshakable command, consciously linking his own image to the revered bearded figures of classical philosophy and the Old Testament. He was not just a king, he was a new Solomon, a new Zeus, his authority woven into the very hair on his face. Yet the medieval church held a deeply conflicted view of this powerful symbol. Within the walls of a monastery, the act of shaving could be a sacred ritual. For many monastic orders, a smooth, clean-shaven face was a powerful declaration of humility. It represented a renunciation of worldly vanity and even a rejection of the aggressive masculinity associated with warrior nobles. They saw it as shedding the old, prideful self. But in a fascinating contradiction, the Eastern Orthodox clergy took the opposite path. They grew their beards long and untrimmed, viewing this as a vital part of their devotion. For them, a long beard was a way to emulate the physical likeness of Christ and the prophets, a direct visual connection to divine authority and tradition. So, in one part of Christendom, a bare face meant holiness, while in another, it was the beard itself that was sacred. This sets the stage for the very specific styles we are about to uncover. Why would a knight shape his beard into a perfect fork? Why did some men risk fines to wear a mustache without a beard? The answers lie in this intricate hierarchy of hair, where every single choice was a calculated statement. A warrior's honor could be stripped away with a single snip of the shears. For the Franks and other Germanic tribes, long, flowing hair was not a mere fashion statement. It was the ultimate symbol of a free man's status and personal power. A king with short hair was a contradiction in terms, a ruler stripped of his visible authority. To forcibly cut a man's hair was a profound act of humiliation, a public casting down from nobility into a state of shameful subservience. It was a punishment considered almost as severe as physical mutilation. This deep cultural reverence for long hair traveled with the Vikings, who took the concept and refined it into an art form. Forget the myth of the permanently unkempt, wild-haired raider. Historical accounts and archaeology paint a very different picture. Viking men were famously fastidious about their grooming. They used beautifully carved combs made from antler or bone, often carried on their person, to keep their hair long and impeccably neat. A well-maintained mane and a thick, practical beard were signs of a disciplined and prosperous individual. In the harsh northern climate, that beard served a vital function, protecting the face from biting winds. But its significance ran far deeper than mere utility. A full beard was a badge of mature masculinity and wisdom, a feature celebrated in their sagas and poetry. For women, long hair was also the foundation of their style, but it was almost always carefully managed. It was typically braided, sometimes in incredibly intricate patterns that may have silently communicated her family lineage or her specific role within the clan. These braids were then often covered with a simple, practical headcloth, a gesture of modesty that also kept the hair protected during daily labor. So, while these early medieval styles were born from function, every plait and every combed strand was imbued with a silent, powerful meaning, a language of identity spoken not with words, but with hair. A new king meant a new haircut for an entire nation. When William the Conqueror crossed the Channel in 1066, his armies brought more than just new laws and a new language. They imposed a new look. The Norman haircut was impossible to ignore. The back of the head was shaved high up, almost to the crown, leaving the scalp bare. Meanwhile, the front was left to grow long, often cut straight across the forehead in a stark, heavy fringe. This severe, almost architectural style created a jarring visual division on a man's head. You can see it clearly stitched into the fabric of history on the Bayeux Tapestry, where row upon row of Norman knights display this uniform look. This was far more than a passing fashion trend. It was a calculated political statement carved into living flesh. For the conquered Anglo-Saxons, who traditionally wore their hair longer as a sign of free status, the message was brutal and inescapable. Every Norman nobleman, every soldier, every official they encountered wore this haircut as a badge of the new regime. The style visually separated the ruler from the ruled, creating an immediate, visible class system. To wear your hair in the old, long Anglo-Saxon style was to mark yourself as part of a defeated and subjugated people. Adopting the Norman cut, however, could be a strategic move, a public signal of allegiance to the new powers in charge. It was a silent declaration that you were on the winning side. This use of hair as a tool of power did not end with the Normans. It set a precedent that would echo through the centuries, finding one of its most extreme expressions in the sacred geometry of the monk's tonsure. A knight's battlefield prowess was suddenly rivaled by the elegance of his curls. The 12th century transformed the warrior into a poet, and his hair and beard became the canvas for this new identity. Chivalry and courtly love reshaped the very ideal of a nobleman. The rugged, bearded warrior of old gave way to a more refined figure, one who prized courtesy and romantic devotion above brute strength. To appeal to the ladies of the court, noblemen began cultivating a softer, more youthful appearance. They wore their hair longer, often carefully curled and styled, and they almost universally adopted clean-shaven faces. This smooth-cheeked, graceful look was a deliberate rejection of the older, more intimidating masculine image. It signaled that a man was cultured, attentive, and dedicated to the intricate rituals of courtly life. His grooming was no longer just for war, it was for love. This romantic revolution extended powerfully to women. The modest head coverings of previous eras did not disappear, but they were now paired with, and sometimes even set aside for, spectacular displays of hair. The idealized lady, immortalized in the tales of King Arthur and the songs of troubadours, was defined by her long, flowing, unbound locks. This was the hair of a maiden in a romance, a symbol of pure, untamed beauty. In reality, Noblewomen styled their own long hair with incredible care, often adorning it with silk ribbons, strands of pearls, and delicate circlets of gold or silver. These were not just decorations. A ribbon's color could silently declare her allegiance or her affection. A circlet could signify her high birth. Her entire presentation was a performance, a living embodiment of the beauty celebrated in every song and story. So, while knights jousted in honor of their ladies, they were also competing in a silent pageant of grooming, where the most polished and courteous man, with the most artful curls, could win a different kind of glory. A noblewoman's hair disappeared completely from public view, and yet her status became more visible than ever. The 13th century ushered in an era of concealment, driven by the church's powerful emphasis on female modesty. For a married woman, letting her hair flow freely in public was now considered deeply improper, even scandalous. Her glory was to be veiled, a direct interpretation of biblical teachings. But this act of hiding did not stifle fashion. It simply transferred the entire language of identity from hair to the headwear that covered it. The simple linen coif, a close-fitting cap that tied under the chin, was the everyday head covering of a commoner's wife. It was practical and plain, designed for work. Yet for a noblewoman, this mandate for modesty became an opportunity for spectacular display. She would wear a complex arrangement known as the barbette and fillet. The barbette was a crisp white linen strip that passed under the chin and was pinned atop the head. Over this, she placed the fillet, a stiffened cylindrical band, often made of silk or velvet, that sat like a crown around her head. A delicate veil would then be draped over the entire structure. The fabrics themselves told a story of wealth. A commoner's veil was likely coarse linen. A duchess would wear the finest silk, imported at great cost, or a veil of shimmering samite. The shape and height of the fillet, the whiteness of the linen, the sheer quality of the veil, these were all carefully calibrated signals of her family's power and prestige. Her hair was hidden, but her social standing was broadcast for all to see, proving that even under a veil, the silent language of fashion could not be silenced. Why would such rigid rules eventually begin to crack? The answer arrived on the winds of a devastating plague, a catastrophe that would unravel the old social order and set hair free once more. The rigid world of veils and courtly curls could not withstand the shock of the Black Death. As the plague swept away a third of Europe, it tore apart the old social fabric, and with it, the strict rules governing appearance began to loosen. In the resulting chaos and labor shortages, survivors found new power to express themselves, and for the knightly class, this meant a dramatic return to a symbol of raw, unvarnished strength. The beard came back into fashion with a force. The 14th century knight, clad head to toe in gleaming plate armor, was a walking fortress. His identity was already broadcast by the bold heraldic crests on his shield and surcoat, but a beard added a final, human layer to this formidable presence. It projected a rugged, experienced masculinity that felt necessary for an age of constant warfare and social upheaval. You can see this shift etched in stone on the tomb effigies that fill our cathedrals. These aren't the smooth-cheeked youths of the previous century's romances. They are mature men, their faces framed by carefully carved beards that complement the sharp, metallic lines of their armor. The styles were deliberate and varied. At court, a nobleman might favor a short, neatly trimmed, court beard, a pointed and precise declaration of status. But the military man, the knight who lived by the sword, almost universally preferred the full, natural beard, allowed to grow thick and strong. This was a conscious rejection of the clean-shaven elegance that had once signaled devotion to a lady. Now the ideal was grittier, more martial. The beard was no longer a sign of rustic piety or ancient tribal kings. For the knight in full plate, it was the final piece of his battle gear, a declaration that his primary identity was not that of a courtly lover, but of a hardened warrior. This resurgence of facial hair was just one part of a broader sartorial revolution, a shift that would soon see headwear transform from a symbol of modesty into an architecture of pure fantasy. The knight's rugged beard was soon overshadowed by a silhouette of pure fantasy. In the wealthy courts of the 15th century, particularly in Burgundy, hair was no longer just a marker of status. It became a breathtaking, almost impossible architecture, a deliberate spectacle of wealth so immense it could defy practicality. For women, the ultimate expression of this was the hennin. Imagine a steeple, not on a cathedral, but on a noblewoman's head. This was a tall, cone-shaped headdress, sometimes reaching 2 feet high, crafted from stiffened silk or brocade and draped with a translucent veil that flowed down to the floor. To where one was to command a room, your presence announced long before you arrived. The effect was so extreme it required a complete redefinition of the face. To achieve the desired look of a high and noble brow, women often plucked their hairlines back, sometimes removing their eyebrows as well. This created a long, serene, domed forehead that was considered the peak of beauty and aristocratic refinement. It was a look that proclaimed the wearer was so far removed from physical labor that even her own hair was an inconvenience to be managed away. Men were not to be outdone in this competition of appearances. They abandoned the practical cuts of soldiers for romantic, almost theatrical styles. The pageboy cut became immensely popular, a smooth, chin-length bob that was often curled under at the ends, giving noblemen a polished, youthful look. Their beards, too, became sharp and stylized, trimmed into elegant points that mirrored the sharp lines of their doublets and poulain shoes. Why did fashion take such a dramatic turn toward the extravagant? This was the ultimate power play in a world where social mobility was slowly becoming possible. A merchant's family might afford silk, but could they afford the team of servants required to construct, maintain, and secure a hennin on one's head? Could they risk the ridicule of wearing it incorrectly? These styles were the final, flamboyant fortress of the old nobility, a last, dazzling attempt to make their superiority visible, tangible, and utterly unreachable. But such extreme displays of wealth never go unchallenged for long, and the pendulum of fashion was about to swing with the force of a new revolution. Even the most extravagant courtly fashions bowed before a single, sacred haircut. The clerical tonsure was the ultimate rejection of the world of status and vanity, a style so potent it sparked theological wars. This was not a fashion statement, it was a spiritual declaration, etched directly on the scalp. The ritual involved shaving the crown of the head, leaving a perfect, bare circle of skin surrounded by a ring of hair. This crown of hair was a constant, physical reminder of the crown of thorns worn by Christ, a symbol of humility and suffering embraced every single day. But this seemingly simple act of devotion was not uniform across Christendom. In fact, the specific way a monk shaved his head could tell you exactly where his loyalties lay in the great religious disputes of the age. The Roman tonsure, favored by the church in Rome, created that familiar ring of hair. It was a clean, circular symbol of unity and order. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, the tonsure was even more comprehensive, involving the shaving of the entire head as a sign of total renunciation. But the most controversial style was the Celtic, or Scottish, tonsure. Instead of shaving the crown, Celtic monks shaved the front of their heads from ear to ear, leaving the hair long at the back. To Roman observers, this looked suspiciously like the hairstyle of the Druids, the old pagan priests of Britain. This was not a minor disagreement over grooming. It was a fierce battle over identity and orthodoxy. When the Roman missionary St. Augustine arrived in England, he did not just argue over the correct date for Easter. He insisted the Celtic monks abandon their distinct tonsure, seeing it as a stubborn remnant of pagan practice that threatened the unity of the church. For the Celtic monks, changing their hairstyle meant denying centuries of their own spiritual tradition. The tonsure was that powerful. It was a public vow, a walking sermon, and a badge of holy allegiance, proving that even a bare patch of scalp could be a battlefield for the soul. That sacred ring of hair on a monk's head required constant maintenance, a daily ritual of shaving that speaks to a broader truth about the medieval world. Achieving any of these elaborate styles, from a knight's forked beard to a noblewoman's towering hennin, demanded a surprising arsenal of tools and a deep knowledge of ancient grooming techniques. Forget plastic bottles and electric clippers. The medieval toolkit was personal, portable, and often beautifully crafted. The most essential item was the comb. Nearly everyone carried one, from the Viking warrior with his antler comb tucked into his belt to the lady of the manor with a finely carved wooden one. These were not crude implements. Archaeologists have found combs with both wide and narrow teeth, designed for detangling long hair and then fine-tuning the style. They were personal treasures, sometimes decorated with intricate carvings of animals or geometric patterns. For cutting, shears were vital. These were not the pivoting scissors we know today, but spring shears made from a single piece of metal bent into a U-shape, with two blades at the end. They required skill and a steady hand to use, but they were perfectly capable of trimming beards into sharp points or cutting hair into the severe Norman fringe. But how did they clean their hair without modern shampoo? They used soap, but it was a very different substance. Medieval soap was often a soft, paste-like blend of animal fats and wood ash, sometimes scented with herbs like lavender or rosemary. It could be harsh, but it was effective. For a more luxurious cleanse, wealthy individuals might use a paste of bran and herbs to absorb oil and dirt. The real magic, however, came from the finishing touches. Herbal rinses were their version of modern hair care products. A woman wanting to brighten her blonde hair would wash it with a rinse made from chamomile flowers. For deep, glossy brunette locks, a rinse of rosemary or sage was common, and perhaps the most universal secret was vinegar. A final rinse of diluted vinegar, made from wine or ale, would cut through any leftover soap residue, close the hair's cuticle, and leave it shining with brilliant, noticeable luster. This daily effort reveals a world far more fastidious and ingenious than we often assume, where personal appearance was a craft requiring time, knowledge, and a dedicated set of tools. A single pole painted in red and white stripes marked the most versatile tradesman on any medieval street. This was the barber surgeon's shop, a place where the line between a fashionable trim and a life-saving procedure was almost non-existent. The iconic pole itself was a direct advertisement for his most requested medical service. The red represented the blood of bloodletting, the white stood for the bandages used to bind the wounds, and the pole itself symbolized the stick the patient would grip to make their veins stand out. This man was your hairdresser, your dentist, and your doctor, all rolled into one. His day was a dizzying mix of the mundane and the macabre. In 1 hour, he might carefully sculpt a nobleman's beard into the latest courtly style, using his finely honed shears and razor. In the next, that same razor might be used to lance a painful boil or perform a quick amputation of a damaged finger. One of his most common procedures was bloodletting, a practice believed to restore the body's balance of humors. He would make a small incision in a vein, often in the arm, and let a measured amount of blood flow into a bowl. He also pulled teeth, set broken bones, and treated wounds. Stepping into his shop was an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the scent of strong herbs, vinegar, and the metallic tang of blood. You would hear the snipping of shears alongside the groans of patients, all mixed with the lively chatter of townsfolk exchanging the latest gossip. The barbershop was a social hub, a newsroom, and a clinic. A man could get his hair cut in the latest pageboy style while learning about a local scandal, and then, if he was feeling unwell, have a tooth pulled. It was a testament to a world where grooming and medicine were inseparable, and where trust in your barber surgeon's steady hand was a matter of both personal pride and survival. The price of an unauthorized curl could be a year's wages. Sumptuary laws transformed personal grooming into a matter of state security, with royal decrees and church statutes specifying the exact length, shape, and even the type of facial hair permitted for every level of society. In 1351, for instance, King John II of France issued a sweeping ordinance that explicitly targeted the rising merchant class. It forbade any man who was not a knight, a lord, or the son of a lord from wearing the mustaches and pointed beards that had become the signature of the warrior aristocracy. A wealthy merchant daring to cultivate such a beard was not just making a fashion choice. He was committing a criminal act of visual deception, blurring the lines that God and king had drawn. The punishment was a heavy fine, public humiliation, or even imprisonment. The church enacted its own parallel laws. Some dioceses declared that any woman below the rank of nobility who wore her hair in the elaborate, uncovered braids of a noble lady was guilty of vanity and immorality, a sin that could see her barred from taking communion. This was not about modesty alone. It was about preventing a farmer's daughter from looking like a baron's wife. The entire social structure was built on a foundation of visible, undeniable hierarchy. If a commoner could dress and groom himself like a noble, then what was the true value of nobility? These laws were the answer, a desperate attempt to legislate a reality where your appearance left no doubt about your place in the world. The barber's chair became a political frontier, every snip of the shears a potential act of compliance or a quiet, costly rebellion. A traveler journeying from the icy fjords of Norway to the sun-drenched piazzas of Italy would have witnessed a continent speaking a dozen different dialects with its hair. In the north, a Scandinavian woman's identity was woven directly into her braids. She might wear a single, thick plait if she were unmarried, or an intricate crown of multiple braids wrapped around her head once she was wed, a style that was both practical for the harsh climate and deeply symbolic of her family and status. Her hair was strong, visible, and integral to her daily life. Contrast this with the daughter of an Italian merchant prince. Her hair, ideally a fashionable blonde achieved through hours sitting in the sun with a wide-brimmed hatless crown, was almost never seen loose in public. Instead, it was the art of the veil that mattered. She would cover her head with diaphanous silks, often in brilliant saffron yellow or costly crimson, woven with gold threads. Her elegance was measured in the transparency of her veil and the costliness of its dye. A silent competition of family wealth played out in modesty. This same divergence shaped the faces of men. An English knight, proud of his martial heritage, might cultivate a thick, forked beard, splitting the end into two distinct points. This was a deliberate, somewhat cumbersome style that required careful waxing to maintain, and it proclaimed a life dedicated to the rugged ideals of chivalry and combat. Just across the channel, however, the French courtier would have looked upon that forked beard as a quaint, almost rustic affectation. In the sophisticated circles of Paris, the clean-shaven face reigned supreme, a legacy of that earlier courtly love tradition. A smooth chin signaled that a man's primary battlefield was the throne room, not the muddy fields of war. His power lay in wit and diplomacy, not in the intimidating display of a warrior's beard. What created such a vivid tapestry of styles? Local traditions were rooted in climate, foreign trade, and deep-seated cultural pride. The practical, sturdy braids of the north made sense in a land of wind and hard labor. The luxurious veils of Italy were a direct result of its position on the Silk Road, with access to fabrics and dyes that were mere legend in other lands. And the knight's forked beard, it was a stubborn echo of the old Viking beards, adapted and stylized over centuries, a reminder that even in a unified Christendom, your hair could still declare which corner of the earth you called home. A saint's golden curls were never just a matter of pigment. In medieval art, the color, texture, and style of hair were a direct line into a person's soul, a visual code as precise as any written text. To understand how hair truly looked, we must learn to read this code, to see past the gilded paint of an illuminated manuscript and into the mind of the artist who held the brush. In these sacred pages and towering cathedral sculptures, physical reality and spiritual symbolism were fused into one. The most virtuous figures, the saints and angels, are almost always shown with hair of radiant gold, meticulously curled and flowing in perfect, harmonious waves. This was not a comment on their natural hair color. It was a declaration of their heavenly nature, their inner light made visible. Their halos were not just golden discs behind their heads. They were extensions of this golden hair, a luminous aura of holiness. Conversely, the damned and the demonic were marked by their hair. Devils, monsters, and traitors were depicted with wild, matted, or bristling black locks, often standing on end as if charged with their own malevolent energy. Judas Iscariot, in countless paintings, is the man with the dark, unruly beard. This visual shorthand told an illiterate congregation exactly who to admire and who to despise, simply by the state of their hair. The same code applied to everyday life. In a scene of a noble wedding, the bride's long, loose, blonde hair signaled her purity and high status, while a servant girl in the background would have her hair neatly covered or cropped short, a quiet but unmistakable mark of her humble station. The artist's brush was not capturing a random scene. It was painting a moral and social hierarchy, with hair as its most eloquent symbol. But what about the real people who inspired these perfect images? For that, we must turn to the poets. A peasant's hair was a tool, as essential and unadorned as the plow he pushed through the earth. For the vast majority of the medieval population, the language of hair was not spoken in the complex grammar of status and romance, but in the simple, urgent vocabulary of survival. Every aspect of their grooming was dictated by the brutal demands of labor. A man working in the fields from dawn until dusk could not risk the distraction of a long, flowing mane. His hair was kept short and practical, often crudely cropped with a knife or the same shears used for shearing sheep. This was not a style born of religious devotion or sumptuary law, but of pure, unvarnished necessity. It prevented sweat from dripping into his eyes, kept vermin from finding a home, and eliminated one more thing that could get caught in the gears of a mill or the teeth of a threshing machine. For women, the rule was the same. Whether she was bending over a cook fire, spinning wool, or weeding a vegetable patch, her hair had to be utterly contained. It was always braided tightly and then completely covered by a simple linen coif or a wrapped kerchief. This headcloth was her constant companion, protecting her hair from dust, sparks, and grime, keeping it clean with a frequency that bathing could not allow. You would never see a peasant woman with the unbound, flowing locks of a noble maiden in a tapestry. That was the hair of a fantasy life, a life of leisure she would never know. Her own hair was a private matter, something for the precious few moments at the end of the day when the coif came off. Their tools were as basic as their styles. A coarse wooden comb, perhaps carved by a family member, was a treasured possession. Soap was a luxury often made at home from saved animal fats and ash, harsh but effective. They might use herbal rinses not for glamour, but for health. A strong rosemary wash could help deter lice. The peasant's hairstyle was a perfect reflection of his world, a world where every action was measured in sweat and yield. While a noblewoman's towering hennin declared her freedom from work, the peasant's tight coif was a testament to the work that defined her very existence. This stark divide, however, was not always so permanent, and the winds of change that began with the Black Death would soon give the common man a new kind of power, one that would eventually be expressed atop his own head. A single strand of hair could hold the power to bless or to curse. Beyond the world of sumptuary laws and courtly fashion, hair existed in a realm of deep superstition, where it was seen as a physical extension of the soul itself. This belief was rooted in ancient traditions and powerfully reinforced by stories like that of Samson in the Old Testament, whose legendary strength resided in his 7 locks. To cut his hair was to strip him of his divine power. This was not just a metaphor for the medieval mind, it was a tangible truth. People genuinely believed that a person's vitality, their very life force, was woven into their hair. This conviction made every clipping, every strand that fell to the floor, a potential ingredient for magic. A witch or a cunning woman could use hair gathered from a brush to weave a love spell, binding the affections of an unsuspecting man. Conversely, that same lock could be used for a malicious curse, buried with ill intent to bring sickness or misfortune upon the person it came from. This is why the disposal of hair was a matter of grave importance. You would never simply toss your shorn locks into the street. Common practice was to burn the clippings completely, reducing them to harmless ash, or to carefully bury them in a hidden, consecrated spot. To leave them where an enemy could find them was to invite disaster into your life. This mystical dimension reveals that hair was far more than a social signal or a fashion accessory. It was considered a sacred, powerful substance, a piece of the self that, if fallen into the wrong hands, could determine your health, your happiness, and your very destiny. A knight returning from the Holy Land carried more than just a sword and a sunburn. He brought back an entire world of new scents and textures that would quietly reshape the face of Europe. The Crusades were not merely military campaigns. They were a colossal, decades-long cultural exchange, forcing Western Europeans into intimate contact with the sophisticated Byzantine and Islamic empires. For a soldier who had spent years in the dusty heat of the Levant, the grooming rituals of the East were not just exotic. They were revelations of comfort and luxury. He encountered the widespread use of perfumed oils, made from roses, sandalwood, and bitter orange. These were not for women alone. In the courts of the East, a nobleman's beard was a point of pride, often anointed with fragrant oils to make it gleam and to leave a trail of scent as he passed. These aromatic practices offered a new definition of masculinity, one that combined martial strength with sensory refinement. The returning crusader brought these oils and techniques home, introducing a culture of personal fragrance that went far beyond the simple herbal rinses of the past. This Eastern influence also arrived in the form of new materials. Crusaders and merchants established trade routes that began to flood European markets with fabrics once considered legendary. Silk, the ultimate luxury, became more available for the veils and gowns of the highest nobility. The brilliant, color-fast dyes of the East, producing deep crimsons and vibrant saffron yellows, transformed the palette of European fashion. A noblewoman's veil was no longer just a symbol of modesty. It could now be a breathtaking banner of silk in a color so rich it declared her family's access to the most distant and expensive markets. Even hair accessories were touched by this exchange, with new dyes coloring the ribbons and threads woven into braids. The crusader who left with a simple woolen tunic and a practical beard returned to a world suddenly hungry for the elegant complexities of the East, proving that even in an age of holy war, the most enduring conquests were often made not with a sword, but with a scented oil and a bolt of silk. A child's first haircut was far more than a simple grooming task. It was a profound rite of passage, a public ceremony that marked their official entry into the gendered world of medieval society. For the first several years of life, the distinction between boys and girls was often blurred in their appearance. Both commonly wore their hair long and loose, a practical choice that also symbolized their shared state of innocence and dependence within the nursery. This changed dramatically around the age of 7, a milestone considered the end of infancy. For a boy, the ceremonial shearing of his long locks was a momentous event. His hair was cut short in the style of his father and the men of his community, a visual and physical removal from the world of women and children. This act formally welcomed him into the male sphere, where he would begin his training as a page, an apprentice, or a laborer. It was a powerful declaration that he was now a small man, his identity beginning to be carved not just by his family name, but by the shape of his hair. The scale of this celebration, of course, was dictated entirely by class. The son of a king or a great lord might have his first haircut commemorated with a feast and gifts from visiting nobles, his shorn locks carefully preserved as a relic of his lost childhood. The son of a blacksmith or a farmer would have a much quieter, though no less significant, observance. His hair was cut short for the same practical reasons as his father's, to keep it out of his eyes as he began his own arduous tasks. In some regions, particularly in rural communities, a small lock of a child's hair might be buried near the family hearth, a superstitious practice meant to bind the child to the home and ensure their health and longevity as they ventured further into the world. A young girl's transition was different, marked not by a cut but by a covering. While she often kept her long hair, the day she began to braid it and pin it up, or cover it with a simple cloth, signaled her own journey toward womanhood and the responsibilities of the household. From their earliest years, medieval children learned that their very bodies were a canvas upon which the expectations of their society were drawn. A noblewoman's discarded hairbrush held more than just tangled strands. It held potential currency. Human hair was a genuine medieval commodity, bought and sold in bustling marketplaces and quiet convent workshops. Long, healthy hair, especially in light shades of blonde or pale brown, was particularly valuable. This hair was carefully collected, sorted, and woven into the foundations for elaborate wigs and hairpieces. These additions were not just for the vain or the balding. They were essential for completing the towering, complex headdresses of the aristocracy. A woman wearing a hennin needed a specific volume and shape to fill the immense structure, and her own natural hair was often insufficient. So, she purchased the hair of another. The sellers were often women of more modest means for whom their own long tresses represented a rare, renewable resource. A peasant woman with exceptionally long, healthy hair might sell a significant portion of it to a wig maker or a trader to help pay her family's yearly taxes or to buy a crucial piece of farm equipment. Her personal sacrifice literally crowned the head of a duchess, creating a hidden economic link between the highest and lowest ranks of society. But hair was not the only beauty product driving trade. The vibrant colors and scents so prized by the elite created entire industries. The quest for blonde hair fueled a demand for saffron, the incredibly expensive spice that yielded a golden dye. Just a few strands of a noblewoman's hair tinted with saffron could cost more than a farmer's monthly earnings. Other common dyes were derived from more accessible but still traded goods. Walnut shells produced rich browns, madder root created a rusty red, and woad leaves were fermented in vast, foul-smelling vats to produce the coveted blue for veils and ribbons. The perfumes used to scent oils and pomades relied on imported resins like frankincense and myrrh, or on vast fields of lavender and rosemary cultivated by specialized growers. This pursuit of beauty supported a vast, hidden network of farmers, chemists, dyers, and merchants, all thriving because of the medieval world's unwavering belief that your hair should speak before you even uttered a single word. You can read a knight's entire career in the shape of his beard. A man's face was his personal heraldry, and each style was a deliberate choice with its own name and social meaning. The most common was the rounded beard, kept short and neatly trimmed to follow the natural jawline. This was the beard of the pragmatic man, the merchant, the lower-ranking knight, or the guildsman who needed to look respectable without appearing overly aggressive or vain. It was a safe, respectable choice in a world governed by strict social codes. Then there was the forked beard, a style that demanded attention and maintenance. This beard was grown long, often reaching the chest, and was meticulously parted down the middle into two distinct waxy points. This was the signature of the high-status warrior, the baron, or the seasoned knight who had the leisure time and the disposable income for such fastidious grooming. Every time he split that beard, he was proclaiming that he was a man of standing, not a common soldier. For those who found the fork a bit too flamboyant, the spade beard offered a powerful compromise. This style was grown full, but the bottom was trimmed straight across, sometimes with the sides sharply angled, creating a broad, square shape that resembled the blade of a spade. It projected strength and authority without the theatricality of the fork, a favorite among judges, wealthy landowners, and kings who wished to appear both formidable and dignified. But perhaps the most socially revealing style was the mustache worn completely alone, without any beard at all. In many periods, this was a distinctly military fashion, hearkening back to the mustaches of the early Germanic tribes. Wearing just a mustache was a bold, almost rebellious statement of martial pride, a look favored by men-at-arms, archers, and professional soldiers. In some towns, sumptuary laws even tried to ban this style for anyone below the rank of knight, fearing its intimidating, warrior-class connotations. So the next time you see a face in a medieval painting, look closely. Is that a safe, rounded beard of a burgher, the proud fork of a tournament champion? Or the solitary mustache of a man who lives by the sword? Each one tells a silent, powerful story. A young noblewoman's braids were not just a style, they were her signature. In the early Middle Ages, before headdresses dominated, her entire identity was woven into the intricate patterns she wore each day. One of the most distinctive styles was the ramshorn braid. Imagine two thick vertical braids, one on each side of her head, not hanging down, but but artfully wrapped and coiled high on her temples. These braids were then bound with colorful silk ribbons, woven in and out to create a spiraling, horn-like effect. The name itself, ramshorn, evokes a sense of ancient power and rustic elegance. This was not a casual hairdo. It required a maid's skilled hands and a significant amount of time, proclaiming that the woman wearing it was of a station far removed from manual labor. The ribbons were not mere decoration. Their color could signal her family's coat of arms, her regional loyalty, or even her personal devotion to a particular saint. As the centuries turned toward the age of chivalry, this practical, structured elegance gave way to a powerful new ideal: the flowing, unbound locks of the courtly lady. In the romances of the 12th century, a noble maiden's hair was her most potent attribute, a symbol of her untouched beauty and aristocratic grace. In reality, this look of careless freedom was an illusion of immense effort. Her long hair was meticulously brushed, often with perfumed oils to make it gleam, and was only left completely loose for the most special of occasions, like her own wedding. For everyday court life, a simpler, more contained style prevailed, the plaits coiled over the ears. This involved dividing the hair into 2 sections, braiding them, and then wrapping each braid over the ear to form a soft, donut-like coil that framed the face. It was a modest yet distinctly aristocratic look, keeping the hair neatly controlled while still showcasing its length and quality. But the true revolution in women's fashion was just around the corner, a shift from hair itself to the architecture that would eventually conceal it completely. The first step was the crespine. This was a cylindrical mesh cage, usually made of gold or silver cord, that confined the coiled braids. Originally a practical net, it soon became a dazzling display of wealth. Then came the burillet, a padded, donut-shaped roll that sat on top of the head, often covered in the most expensive fabrics and jewels. But nothing compared to the dramatic zenith of medieval headwear, the butterfly hennin. This was not a steeple, but a wide, heart-shaped structure made from stiffened wire and translucent silk, with a veil stretched across it like the wings of a butterfly. It was an impossible, breathtaking silhouette that defied nature and practicality, a final, flamboyant declaration of a woman's rank. From the earthy ramshorn braids to the ethereal butterfly hennin, the evolution of women's hairstyles charts a fascinating journey from personal, hair-based identity to an era where status was built on a scaffold of silk and wire. The myth of the permanently filthy medieval peasant is a story we need to wash right out of our hair. Cleanliness was not only valued, it was a practical necessity, and people employed a whole arsenal of tools and techniques to achieve it. The concept of a daily full-body immersion in a tub was rare for most, but that did not mean people went unwashed. Regular washing of the face, hands, and hair was a common morning ritual. For the hair, this often meant using a basin of water and a cloth, meticulously working through the strands to remove the grime of the previous day. When a more thorough cleaning was needed, they turned to soap, but it was nothing like the gentle, scented bars we know today. Medieval soap was a soft, paste-like substance made from animal fats and lye derived from wood ash. It could be harsh and left a residue, but it was remarkably effective at cutting through grease and dirt. After soaping, the final, crucial step was a rinse with diluted vinegar. This was their secret weapon for shine. The acidic vinegar would strip away any lingering soap, smooth the hair's cuticle, and leave it looking lustrous and manageable. Combing was another non-negotiable daily practice. A clean, well-maintained comb was a personal treasure, used not just for styling, but for the vital task of removing lice and nits. Archaeologists find these combs everywhere, from city cesspits to rural farmsteads, proof that this basic act of hygiene was universal. For those who could afford it, public bathhouses were a thriving feature of medieval town life, serving as social hubs where one could get a haircut, a shave, and a proper soak. The idea of a universally dirty population is a modern fiction. They fought a constant, ingenious battle against grime with the resources they had, proving that the desire to be clean, and to have hair that looked it, is a timeless human impulse. The towering hennin did not simply vanish overnight. Its dramatic silhouette began to soften and shrink, its steeple collapsing into a gentler, rounded form as the 15th century drew to a close. This was the first visible sign of a profound cultural shift. The rigid, architectural headwear that had so clearly separated the noblewoman from the commoner was slowly dismantled. In its place, something remarkable happened. Hair itself began to reappear in public. After centuries of being hidden beneath veils and complex structures, the natural hair of wealthy women was once again on display. It was not, however, the unadorned, flowing locks of the early Middle Ages. This was a new kind of display, one of controlled opulence. Women now styled their hair in soft waves, often parted severely down the middle, and they adorned it not with towering fabric, but with the wealth of the world. They threaded ropes of pearls through their braids, pinned jeweled brooches to their coiled tresses, and wore delicate, gem-encrusted caps that sat at the back of the head like crowns, framing the face rather than concealing it. This was the dawn of the Renaissance aesthetic, where the human form, including the hair, was becoming a worthy object of beauty in its own right. For men, this transition was written on their faces with even greater elaboration. The full, natural beards of the knights evolved into meticulously sculpted works of art. Beards were starched, perfumed, and twisted into sharp, geometric points. They were trimmed into perfect rectangles or shaped into the wide, flared styles that would become the iconic look of King Henry VIII. This was no longer just the beard of a warrior. It was the beard of a sovereign, a statesman, a man of the new humanist age, asserting his individual power and personality through the extreme control of his own appearance. This evolution from the medieval to the Renaissance was not a sudden break, but a continuous, flowing river of change. The same social forces that had once built the hennin were now taking it apart, reminding us that fashion is never static. It is a living language, constantly adapting to whisper the secrets of a changing world. From the sacred ring of a monk's tonsure to the impossible architecture of a noblewoman's hennin, every strand of hair spoke a complex language of identity, faith, and raw political power. This was a world where your hairstyle was your public resume, your declaration of allegiance, and your family's heraldry carved directly onto your body. We have traced this silent language from the warrior's beard to the merchant's forbidden mustache, from the peasant's practical crop to the king's imposed haircut. These styles tell a story far richer than vanity. They narrate the rigid structures of the social order, the unexpected cultural exchanges born from conflict, and the boundless human creativity that finds expression even under the strictest of rules. The next time your eyes wander across a medieval painting or a stone effigy in a cathedral, pause for a moment, look past the gilded halos and the solemn faces, and focus on the hair. Study the braids, the curls, the shaven patches, and the sculpted beards. In those details, you might just read a person's entire life story, their dreams, their faith, and the very world they fought to navigate. So we have to ask, after this journey through time, what style do you think you would have worn? Would you have been a knight with a forked beard, a merchant risking a fine for a fashionable mustache, or a noblewoman balancing a tower of silk on your head? Let your imagination run wild in the comments below. And if you enjoyed unraveling this historical mystery with us, subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our past.